Painting flowers is one of my favorite things to do, and today I want to show you how to make this complicated hydrangea easy to paint. If you are new around here, hi, I'm Eva, and this flower can look quite tricky, but in this video I will show you a few simple tips to help you break it down step by step. You will be amazed how simple it can be to paint this flower. So let's get started. Alright, let's paint, and because it's quite complicated flower with lots of details, we will make our life easier and we will start painting with just few flowers and then we will add the details. And you can find all the brushes that I will be using linked in the description, but you can use any other brushes that you prefer. From the colors, choose purple, pink or blue color as a base for your flower, and then you can also adjust the colors later. So from the brushes, I will be using the brush number 9 from the brush watercolor brush set, and we will start with a few petals which will be overlapping a little bit, but I am not lifting the pencil or the brush, so I have a little bit of the texture there left. So now I will create another petal here, and I'm not painting over the other petal, but a little bit of overlap is alright. Here there will be another petal, so I'm leaving some space for that. And the last one will go here. Alright. Now on to a next one. We want to have a little bit of variety in those. So now I will start with one petal a little bit shorter, then one little bit bigger and slight overlap. And this one is a little bit more like a triangle, or like two triangles. And then this one will have a slight bend, and then I will add a smaller one here, still not lifting the pencil. Now we will create another one which is tilted a little bit more, so we see the petals more from the side. Okay, let's do another one like that. All right, and let's paint another one. So now I will take a different brush just to add a little bit of detail in the middle of the flower. And for that I will use slightly darker color. And I will do that on a separate layer. So I will draw lines coming out of the middle of the flower just to mimic the details and the veins that are kind of in the middle of those petals. And I'm using these like radial brush strokes. And I'm also varying the pressure from lower to stronger pressure, so lower to higher pressure. So you can kind of create that variety there and create these radial strokes going in the middle to each of these flowers. This one is a little bit different because this one is sideways. So we are creating these lines going to the edge here. Perfect. Now I will also blur these lines a little bit, and I will use the brush number 19, still from the watercolor set, just to reduce the sharpness of the strokes at the end. Perfect. And now I will go back to the layers and I will create another layer and I will create more definition on the edges of the flowers. I will use the sketching brush. As you might know from some of my other art, that I like to add a little bit of definition, especially where there is a little bit of shadow. So these petals are overlapping here. So I'm adding a little bit of the definition to some of these areas. So I'm using also soft, then higher pressure and lower pressure. So you are creating this type of brush strokes, soft, high, soft pressure. Alright, so almost done with this part. Perfect. Now we can zoom out and we can select all our layers and just move them a little bit higher, because we will be arranging them into a circle or a ball, how the hydrangeas are growing. Before that, we have to add a little bit of the background here, and I will select this layer with the flowers. Tap on the icon, click on select. Now we have the area selected, and on the layer below I will drop the white color into the object. You can see the threshold. I will use the highest threshold possible, so there is the opacity there. So I will fill each of these flowers by tapping on continue filling, and this should fill all my flowers. So here you can see the flowers are there. Now I can deselect and I can duplicate this layer a few times, so there is enough opacity if I want to paint under it. So let's check. I will swap to different color, and now the opacity is better and we still have texture from our brush. Alright, so now you can group these layers and you can duplicate the whole group. So I will hide this group and I will flatten this one. So we have the flowers as one object. So now I will select each flower so I can have them on a separate layer. Swiping down, cut and paste. Now it's on a separate layer, so I will do that for the other flowers as well. And now I can rearrange these flowers so they create this half circle or full circle if you want to create this ball of hydrangea. So I will use these flowers on the edges, so I will rotate them and put them on the edge, but also at the bottom of these other flowers. So I can duplicate this one, rotate it, duplicate, perfect. Now I have this flower which also fit on the edges, and I will duplicate it again and rotate as well. Then we have these main flowers which are quite big, and we want to have them on the top, and the same goes for this one. We can also make them a little bit smaller so we can create these gaps in between. And you can also use the warp tool. Perfect. So now I will merge all of these layers. And now I will paint under this layer, and I will create the shadow layer showing some of the flowers in the background. And for that I will use a loose watercolor brush, and I will paint with darker blue color. And I will loosely paint behind these flowers. And I can also alternate and use a purple color, so we have more colors in the background. And it's already starting to look great, but let's add few of these petals just in the background where we are missing some part. So I will create new layer. I will use slightly darker color than we have on the other flowers already, and I will go to the original brush that I used for the flowers, and I will just add few more petals. Perfect. Now let's create more volume. So I will create the new layer, and I will choose a darker color, so like darker blue or purple color. And now on the separate layer I will paint on the bottom half of this hydrangea. And you don't have to be super precise, just select half of it and trust the process. But make sure you are on a separate layer. Now go to the layer and set the layer to multiply. Then let's merge all of these layers together. And now we can set this layer with a clipping mask by tapping on the layer and selecting clipping mask. Now you can reduce the opacity a little bit, and you can smudge the edges with grainy smudge tool. So now we imagine that we have light coming from the top left. I will reduce the opacity of this one even more, and you can test out different blending modes. Also, this very saturated one looks quite nice, or darker color. Perfect. Now create a new layer and we will add a little bit of color variety. So I will select a lighter orangey pink tone, and I will draw on few petals on the top. And for that I will swap to more flat brush, so brush number 30 in this case, and I will paint on top of some of the leaves. And this will be quite subtle, so you don't have to be very precise in this one. So after you paint it on few of the petals, you can go back to brushes and set the layer to overlay. We'll reduce the opacity slightly, and now you can play with few of the other colors. So you can add something a little bit more orangey, or also very pink. And then you can also just blend it a little bit so it's more subtle. And we can add also a little bit of the blue, because I think that's a nice addition, and I will do that on some of the petals here, more closer to the bottom. And it can be even like darker blue. And you can add also some lighter blue on some of the petals. And I'm keeping the lighter color closer to the edges of the petal. And we can blend it together with the other colors again with the same smudge tool. Perfect. And now to add a little bit more detail, we can add the middle part of the flower. It's easier to have that on a separate layer, so I will use the brush with a little bit more detailing, and I will use this either light blue or you can use a very light kind of almost yellowy beige and draw a circle in some of the flowers. So you are kind of doing these movements with the wrist, so there is a little bit more variety, and you can kind of vary the pressure as well. So here we don't see the middle, so I'm not adding the white or yellow dot there. Perfect. And to emphasize the middle part of the flower, you can add a little bit of this dark blue close to it, and I will add that with this brush, which is more like flat brush. I need to make the brush a little bit smaller, and I'll just paint a little bit closer to some of these circles just to add slight definition there. But this is very optional step, so you don't have to add that. Perfect. It looks great. I think we can add leaf, so we have some nice detail around. So to do that, I will create a new layer. So I will use the same brush as I did for the flowers, and I will draw a leaf with this jiggery, hard or kind of broken edge. And I will fill the shape with the brush strokes because I want to keep some of the texture. And I will repeat that with 2 more leaves. And I will duplicate this layer to increase the opacity, and on a separate layer I will create more colors, so something a little bit more blue. So I'll paint on this side of the leaf, and then a little bit here, and also on this leaf. And then I will add a little bit of this desaturated red color, almost brown, and then also warm green. and also darker purple just under the leaves. Now I will set the layer to color burn and reduce the opacity and also smudge it a little bit. Now I will add details to the leaves. On a separate layer, I will take the pencil brush and I will softly draw these kind of veins of the leaf. And now I'll reduce the opacity and it looks already pretty great. But we can add few more details, like we have these lines on the flowers. So we can add few of those lines also to the edges of the leaves. So I will create that on a separate layer with the sketching brush. I will add a little bit of line here as well. Perfect. And now I will create a new layer and we can add some watercolor splatters. So I will sample the color from the flower and I will add some splatters around and I will try out a few different ones. So there is slight variety and I will also add all the details in different sizes, just tapping on the canvas, and I will also add few green ones and also a little bit of a yellow, and I think that kind of adds this super nice detail. And you can always delete a few if you feel like maybe you have too many. And when you are happy with all the details, you can select all the layers and group them. And if you have enough layers available, you can just duplicate all of these layers and everything becomes even more vibrant. Or you can keep it with these textures. I can flatten this group and I can also uncover the paper texture and art texture because I was working in my paper texture template. You can always import this artwork into the paper texture template to have additional textures. So you can have these textures on top of the art. So if I have this duplicated artwork, everything is even more vibrant. When you're happy with everything, you can duplicate the canvas and you can also merge these layers so everything is even more vibrant. We can also go to the adjustments and you can go to curves and we can move the sliders slightly so we can adjust some of the vibrancy here. So as you can see, you can play around with this part slightly. Perfect. I quite like how everything looks now when it's even more vibrant. So I'm happy with this one. All right, amazing. And now to mimic the focus of camera where something is more in focus and something is a little bit more blurry, we will smudge some of the parts of the flower, and to do that I will duplicate the layer so we can adjust the intensity, and I will use the smudge from the brush number 19 and I will smudge some of the edges here. So I will keep this part more in focus. You can see that this one is smudging a little bit outside, so we can use the clipping mask and clip it to this part. Perfect. And now I will reduce the opacity. You can see now it's very sharp with zero opacity, and something like this in between. Alright, I hope that you enjoyed this tutorial, and please tag me if you share your artwork, if you followed this video.